The winter air, sharp and unforgiving, was not half as cold as the rejection that still vibrated in Alara's soul. She had come to the Starfall Café, a small, warmly lit sanctuary of spiced mead and pine boughs, for a date with a man named Gareth. A man she had spent 6 agonizingly hopeful months believing might finally be the one to see past the scarred surface of her history, to the resilient, yearning heart beneath. But as the clock on the cafe wall had chimed 7, just, then 7 to 15, then 7:30, the bitter truth, a truth her life seemed predisposed to repeat, had settled over her like a shroud of ice. Gareth was not coming. Her hands, still clutching the small velvet bag containing the single, perfect moonstone she had intended to give him, were shaking. Her eyes, usually a fierce, startling emerald, were burning with the unshed tears of a final, crushing disappointment. The empty chair opposite her, draped in shadow, became a cold, relentless monument to her failure to connect, to belong, to be chosen. Every conversation they'd shared, every fleeting, hopeful glance had been a lie, a whisper of a future that the universe, or perhaps just cruel, small men like Gareth, refused to grant her. She was a shadowkin, a lineage often reviled but secretly envied for their longevity and connection to the moon's ethereal plane. And tonight, her gift of sensitivity was a curse, allowing her to feel the absence, the rejection, not just in her mind but deep in the marrow of her ancient bones. She thought of her mother's oft-repeated, gentle lie. Your strength, Alara, is a light too bright for weak men to handle. It didn't feel like strength now. It felt like an endless, lonely vigil. She stood, not wanting the cafe's pitying glances, moving toward the frosted glass door, her long, midnight blue cloak a beautiful, solitary stain against the cheer. The cold comfort of the alley, the scent of fresh snow and distant city lights was infinitely preferable to the suffocating warmth of false hope. I should have known, she whispered, a mantra of self-punishment. I always know. But then, just as the finality of her despair threatened to pull her under, 2 small, bright figures, moving with uncanny, silent grace, emerged from the alley's deepening shadow. This was the moment, the very pit of her emotional abyss, that destiny, in its high contrast irony, chose to intervene. 2 children, not human, not entirely. 2 shadowling twins, no older than 5, their eyes wide and luminous, silver in the faint gaslight, and their question, simple and unfiltered, was a blow of pure, crystalline sound against the wall of her grief. Excuse me, Daejagger Countess, but can we join you? Our father is alone too. She stopped, the cold air catching in her throat. The word Daejagger, an ancient, respectful title for her shadowkin lineage, like a forgotten language suddenly spoken aloud. It was impossible. No one outside their insular circle used that name. She looked down at the twins, Astrid and Bronte, mirror images with startling silver hair that caught the light like spun moonlight, dressed in miniature, impeccably tailored coats. Even at 5 years old, the shadowling twins had learned to read people, not just their emotions, but the very resonance of their souls. They didn't see the shadowkin stigma. They saw the deep, shimmering sadness. Our father says sometimes the strongest people just need a proper invitation. Astrid, the slightly bolder of the two, declared, her voice a serious, tiny bell. Bronte nodded gravely, pointing a perfectly gloved finger across the cobbled alley toward a dimly lit corner booth in a quieter, more exclusive tavern, the Obsidian Quill. There, partially hidden by a curtain of rich velvet, sat a man. He was stillness personified. He didn't look up, but Alara felt the weight of his presence, a palpable, almost physical pressure, like the atmosphere before a great storm. He was impossibly, breathtakingly handsome, yet the beauty was laced with a chilling, predatory elegance. His high cheekbones, the aristocratic cut of his jaw, and the slight, weary slump of his shoulders all spoke of power and profound isolation. He was dressed in clothes of a quality she had only read about, and the mere line of his posture suggested royalty, perhaps even an ancient sovereign power. A vampire king, she thought, the title leaping unbidden from her mind, a poetic description of his dark, solitary majesty. The weak man didn't come so you could meet us instead, Bronte said, the child as oracle, articulating the profound life lesson with devastating simplicity. Elara felt the sting of her tears finally dry, replaced by a strange, exhilarating jolt of fate. Every disappointment had led her here, she realized, the high contrast irony of her rejection suddenly breathtakingly clear. Gareth's cruelty was a beginning, not an end. The man in the corner, Lysander Veronin, the name was somehow imprinted on her mind, the lord of the umbral court, a being of unimaginable power and sorrow, finally lifted his head. His eyes, the color of rich, dark amber, fixed on her, not with pity or judgment, but with an intense, quiet recognition that seemed to strip away the layers of her protective facade, seeing the raw, resilient heart beneath. He inclined his head, a gesture of deep, formal respect that contrasted sharply with the chaotic simplicity of the moment. "Children," she managed, her voice thick. "Are you sure?" Astrid tugged insistently on her cloak. "We are professionally trained in vegetable negotiations, Dejagger Countess, and in introductions. Come, he needs convincing that not all of the light kin are foolishly bright." Elara allowed herself to be led across the icy cobblestones, the cool, shockingly so, but steady and firm grip of the twins' small hands, a grounding force. The contrast between the Starfall Cafe's eager, superficial cheer and the Quill's hushed, ancient elegance was staggering. Here, the air was thick with the scent of old leather and something deeper, more elemental, the rich, subtle, metallic scent of the eternal. Lysander Veronin did not smile. A small, sad curve of his lips would have been easier to process than the immense, profound gravity of his gaze. He stood as they approached, rising to his full, commanding height, a figure of effortless power that made the memory of Gareth's petty excuses vanish into the ether. He looked down at the twins with an affection that was entirely unguarded, a raw and surprising vulnerability. "My little ambassadors," he murmured, his voice a low, resonant baritone that seemed to vibrate in the very glass of the water goblet before him. "You have acquired a guest, I see." He turned the full force of his amber gaze onto Elara. It was not a judgment, it was an invitation to be seen, truly seen, for the first time. The silence stretched, a high-stakes narrative pause broken only by the soft, intimate scoring that seemed to swell in the deep corners of the tavern, a lone cello playing a melody of profound loneliness and dawning hope. I apologize," Elara began, suddenly acutely aware of her trembling hands, her worn cloak, her exposed emotional state. My date canceled. The girls found me across the way." Lysander waved a dismissive hand, a gesture of ancient impatience for human foolishness. "Gareth's failure," he stated simply, "is merely a small cog in a much larger machine, one that, I assure you, operates entirely on the principles of fate. Please, Dajagger Countess, sit. Astrid and Bronte have informed me that your heart is in need of warming. My name is Lysander, and while I may not be trained in vegetable negotiations, I am rather adept at extinguishing unwelcome shadows." He pulled out the chair directly opposite him, the very same spot that had remained achingly empty at the Starfall Café. The repetition of the gesture, the offering of the chair, was a turning point. "May I change that?" he asked, his deep voice dropping to an intimate whisper as he gently, with an almost agonizing tenderness, lifted her chin with the lightest touch of his cool, shockingly so, but steady and firm fingers, forcing her to meet his unwavering gaze. May I change your evening, your story? His question hung in the air, a dramatic question that promised a massive change, a destiny unfurling right there on the worn, cool marble table between them. The sheer audacity, the depth of his conviction struck her dumb. I, I don't understand, she whispered, the familiar terror of being vulnerable fighting against the fierce, exhilarating pull of his presence. She retreated, her internal monologue a flurry of self-doubt and defensive measures. He is too much, too powerful. He sees the Shadowkin in me, the reviled truth. You are running a projection, Countess Elara, Lysander said, his voice quiet but commanding, as if reading the swirling chaos of her mind. You are anticipating the cruelty of a weak man, applying his template to me. Stop. Look at what is real. Look at my children. They are rarely wrong. He gestured to Astrid and Bronte, who had already settled themselves on the banquette beside him, sipping quietly from tall, elegant glasses of chilled berry nectar. Their eyes, those silver, luminous eyes, were fixed on Elara with an expression of profound, uncomplicated hope. The ethereal plane, Lysander continued, leaning closer, his proximity a warm, strange pressure in the cool room, tells us what the logical mind refuses to accept. You have spent your life waiting for permission to exist, for a man to validate your worth. I do not offer validation. I offer the recognition of a soul I believe I have been waiting for since the Sunstone Alliance. I offer a connection. He was speaking their language, the high-stakes, supernatural vocabulary of their shared, secret world. He wasn't afraid of her. He knew her. The rejection tonight, Elara said, her voice strained, a final, heartbreaking admission. It felt like fate, a confirmation of my solitary nature. Lysander chuckled, a deep, musical sound of genuine warmth that cracked the polished facade of his solemnity. Fate, Elara, is simply the universe correcting an error. Gareth was the error. We are the correction. Every failure he committed tonight, every excuse he manufactured, was a path-clearing measure, a necessary catalyst. You needed to be here at this precise moment of devastating finality so that the intervention could be absolute. He reached across the table, his hand large, powerful, and utterly steady, his scent a subtle, intoxicating mix of old parchment and cold night air, filling her senses. Tell me, Dajager, Countess, what is the greatest fear of the Shadowkin? Is it not the cold, the endless, eternal cold of loneliness? It is, she conceded, the single word, an admission of her deepest, most guarded vulnerability. The loneliness was the true curse of their kind, the price of their longevity. She felt the tears return, but this time they were hot, cleansing, the release of 6 months of strained hope and 30 years of quiet, existential solitude. Lysander did not press the issue, merely holding her gaze, his presence a silent promise of warmth. The focus shifted, the pacing slowing to an intimate, slow-burn rhythm, grounded entirely in sensory description and emotional internal monologue. Elara realized she was not simply sitting across from a man, she was sitting across from a force of nature, an emotionally powerful, secretly solitary male lead, whose own profound isolation mirrored her own. The empty chair at Starfall had been a symbol of rejection. This chair, now occupied, now warm, was a symbol of acceptance, of a destiny finally aligning. The visual metaphor was stark, the flickering candle on their table, the only light. Source in their immediate vicinity seemed to burn brighter, casting his aristocratic features into sharp, dramatic relief. She noticed the small, almost imperceptible lines of weariness around his eyes, the subtle tension in his jaw that spoke of a responsibility far greater than her own. Our father is sometimes very tired, Bronte observed suddenly, the child as oracle once more, providing external, omniscient details that cut straight to the core of Lysander's character. He doesn't talk much about it, but he needs a friend who knows about long, important things. The simplicity of the children's dialogue contrasted sharply with the elevated poetic language Lysander had used, creating a beautiful dissonance. They worry, Lysander admitted, a brief, self-deprecating response to the chaos that managed to inject a moment of gentle, situational humor into the high drama. I'm afraid my long, important things often involve paperwork and convincing ancient councils not to declare war over minor offenses. I am, in essence, an eternally beleaguered administrator. This vulnerability, this touch of authentic, simple humor, broke the last of Ilara's icy reserve. She offered a hesitant, shaky smile. I am an archivist, she replied, the simple declarative sentence a bridge between their worlds. I deal in long, important things that have already happened. Maybe we can pool our resources. The tension in the air, the initial high-stakes charge of the meeting, began to dissipate, replaced by a softer, deeply sentimental warmth. Lysander nodded, a profound, weighted gesture. A new archive, he mused, the words suddenly taking on a deeper, metaphorical meaning. A new collection of memories, beginning now. The next hour was a quiet revolution. They spoke of history, of the subtle magic woven into the fabric of the old city, of their mutual understanding of the weight of time. The script relied heavily on sensory description to ground the fantasy elements, the smooth, cool marble, the distinct metallic, clean scent that clung to Lysander's expensive coat, the taste of the rich, dark berry nectar the twins insisted she try. Ilara shared a flashback, not of her rejection, but of the day she accepted her shadowkin nature, the moment she realized her difference was not a flaw, but a profound gift. Lysander, in turn, offered a brief, painful internal monologue, a rare glimpse into the century of solitary leadership, the burden of a vampire king who had spent his entire life protecting a world that feared him, perpetually alone at the summit of his power. I have known every shade of human fear, he confessed, his voice barely audible above the intimate score, now dominated by the deep, mournful tones of a cello. But I never thought I would know this quiet recognition, this lack of pretense. The repetition of key phrases came naturally. Astrid, watching Ilara's face, suddenly repeated their first profound observation. Maybe the weak man didn't come so you could meet us instead. The high contrast irony of the situation was once again brought into sharp focus. Gareth's failure, his basic cruelty, was the necessary door through which Ilara stepped into her true destiny. Lysander's full attention, his absolute focus on her words, was a revelation. He didn't interrupt. He didn't judge. He merely absorbed, his amber eyes seeming to catalog the intricacies of her soul. This wasn't a date. It was a reveal, a mutual acknowledgement of two profoundly solitary beings, finally finding their mirror. The visual cue prompts were at work, slow, cinematic, dissolved transitions in Ilara's mind as she recalled the loneliness, contrasting with quick, punchy cuts of the children's dialogue. On the table, the flickering candle was the visual metaphor, symbolizing the precarious, beautiful hope that was just now beginning to take flame. The reveal continued, not in the form of a dramatic plot twist, but in the intimate unveiling of their wounded yet resilient hearts. Ilara told Lysander about the moonstone in her velvet bag, the small, perfect gift she had intended for Gareth, a symbol of her quiet, deep hope for a normal connection. It's a fool's hope, I know, she concluded, her voice thick with residual shame. Lysander reached for the bag, his touch light, respectful. He did not ask to see the stone, instead simply holding the small object in his palm. Hope is never foolish, Ilara. Misplaced hope is painful, yes, but hope itself is the engine of the eternal plane. Gareth would have been oblivious to its meaning, he would have seen a pretty stone. I see the intention. I see the soul you offered him. He paused, his thumb gently tracing the velvet texture. Keep it. It is no longer a symbol of disappointment. It is a signpost. It marked the moment you were ready to give your heart, even if the recipient was unworthy, and it led you to the moment your heart was truly seen. The emotional tone shifted dramatically, moving from the initial heartbreaking tension to a deeply sentimental acceptance. The language style remained elevated, but the dialogue was simple and profoundly authentic. It is time for vegetable negotiations to conclude, Father, Astrid announced, stretching with the exaggerated languor of a small child. We must be back before the silver bell chimes midnight. Lysander stood, his gaze never leaving Ilara's. The impending departure brought a fresh wave of high-stakes narrative tension. The moment was ending. Was the connection real, or was it a beautiful, fleeting anomaly? Lysander placed a small silver coin, not currency, but an ancient sigil, on the table. I have changed your evening, I believe, he stated, his voice the smooth, low baritone that had already claimed a permanent space in her memory. Now, may I change your tomorrow? He walked her out of the obsidian quill, Astrid and Bronte flanking them like miniature, well-behaved sentinels. The contrast between the cold, empty alley and the warmth radiating from the small, unconventional group was a testament to the emotional journey of the last few hours. You will find me to be a man of simple needs, Ilara, Lysander said, pulling her hood up gently around her face, his fingers lingering briefly against her temple. I require truth, quiet conversation, and the occasional, expertly conducted, vegetable negotiation. And since Astrid and Bronte have declared you a suitable addition to their life, I find I must acquiesce to their divine wisdom. Ilara laughed, a genuine, joyful sound that felt entirely new to her. You use your children as an elegant excuse. I use them as an oracle, he corrected, his amber eyes shining with a startling, intense light. They see the destiny. I merely follow the path. My house is in the North Quarter, a place of far too many corridors and not enough laughter. I would like to change that too. The rhetorical pause was perfectly placed. He took her hand, his cool, steady grip enveloping hers. Come for supper tomorrow. You will have to endure a protracted conversation about the merits of steamed carrots versus roasted. Bring the moonstone. It will be the beginning of a new archive. This was the resolution, clear, direct, and entirely unconventional. The repetition of the initial, pivotal dialogue, "Can we join you?" echoed in her mind, transformed now into a permanent, open-ended invitation. Ilara did not hesitate. The memory of Gareth's cowardice was finally completely eclipsed by the profound dignity of Lysander's unwavering gaze. I will be there, she promised, her voice strong and entirely certain. The Shadowkin's strength, once a barrier, was now a bridge, and I will bring the moonstone. Lysander nodded, a profound satisfaction settling over his aristocratic features. He bent low, and for a heart-stopping moment, Ilara thought he was going to kiss her, but he merely pressed his cool, firm lips against the back of her hand, a formal, ancient, and deeply intimate gesture. Until then, Ilara Selwyn, may your night be free of shadows, at least the ones I haven't specifically permitted. He winked, a sudden playful gesture that revealed the gentle, warm humor beneath the Vampire King's solemnity. Astrid and Bronte waved wildly, their small, silver heads bobbing. Bye, Dajager Countess. See you for carrots. She watched them disappear, not in a cloud of smoke or a supernatural flash, but with the quiet, dignified swiftness of people who owned the night. Ilara stood alone in the alley once more, but the loneliness was gone. The narrative structure was complete. Rejection had led to intervention, which had fostered connection, resulting in the final, exhilarating resolution. She felt the warmth of the moonstone, still clutched in her velvet bag, no longer a monument to failure, but a tangible symbol of destiny's strange and wonderful correction. The story's conclusion, the rhetorical framing device, settled in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, the worst moments of our lives are not ends, but the dramatic questions that preface our true beginning. Every disappointment, every solitary evening, every cruel word from a weak man had been a necessary step on the path to this alley, this cool hand, this strange, beautiful family of shadows and light. And the man who had promised to change her story, the silent, sorrowful vampire king, had not only kept his word, but had given her a new lesson to archive. Loneliness is not a condition of the soul. It is merely an absence waiting to be filled by the predestined connection. The moon, high and full, a symbol of her own ethereal plane, seemed to shine down just for her, lighting the way to the North Quarter, where a vampire king and his two little oracle daughters were waiting for the arrival of the Dejager Countess.